Place names certainly must have been a very important source for those who were writing down the sagas. And as you say, it's difficult sometimes to know which came first, or whether the anecdote which is explaining a place name in a saga is really genuine or has been created out of the place name. So sometimes one of the things that the sagas do is that they are trying to explain why places have the names that they do, and often creating characters out of place names that may originally have actually referenced the physical appearance of the landscape rather than a specific individual. We find these anecdotes or attempts to explain place names in a number of sagas, and sometimes in quite a high proportion of them in certain sagas, but not in others. So we find a lot of these place name explanations, for example, in Bárða saga, in Harða saga, in Kjalnesinga saga, and other sagas, but not, for example, in a saga like Njáls saga. So there's something going on there with regard to how authors of these different sagas are using place names as a source, and how far they want to try to explain, explicitly explain how places around the landscapes they're thinking about actually got their names.
Of course, the mapping of a saga with a specific location is often questionable. We cannot always be sure whether the place names we have now refer to the same phenomena of the physical world as they did back in the saga age. Does this create a lot of frustration for scholars, or is it simply an opportunity to be creative?
Attempts to identify specific places that are named in the sagas and find those places in the landscape. This has been something that's been at the heart of saga scholarship from the earliest times, really. And it's an important theme, not least in the late 19th century and early 20th century, because it's very much connected to attempts to think about the authors of these narratives. And so early scholars spent a lot of time trying to figure out whether this or that place in the contemporary landscape was the same place as that named in any single saga. Sometimes this can be a very difficult thing to do, and presents certain challenges. And it's important always to remember the extent to which the landscape has changed, in some cases a lot, in different parts of Iceland because of the effects of volcanic eruptions and glacial flooding and other kind of environmental events such as that. For me, this question of trying to find the places, specific places where events in the sagas took place in the actual landscape, can be something of a red herring, I think. And this is partly because place names move around. A place name might fall out of use and then a place might be renamed on the basis of a saga text. So the relationship between place in the landscape and place in the saga can be quite complex. I think in general this kind of approach is actually a kind of part of the reception of the sagas, and it points to a sort of a deeper desire or a feeling that it's necessary to be able to point specifically to a identifiable place in the landscape in order to prove or disprove support or contradict the veracity of a saga. So it depends very much on what one thinks the sagas are in terms of genre as much as anything else.
Mm-hmm.